who in your wisdom and goodness has appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of men and women, we beseech you to behold with your abundant favor us your servants, whom you have called to the performance of important trusts in these islands. Father, let your blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote your honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands, and of those whose interest you have committed to our charge. And this we beg in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Be seated. The minutes of the 5th of June, 2019.
Madam President.
Senator Jardine, you have the floor.
Madam President, I move that the minutes of the meeting of Wednesday, the 5th of June, 2019 be taken as read.
Is there an objection to that motion? No objection. Senator Jardine.
Madam President, I move that the minutes of Wednesday, 5th of June, 2019 be confirmed as the correct record of that meeting.
Is there an objection to that motion? No objection. The minutes of the 5th of June, 2019 are confirmed. Before I go, I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of the Secretary to the Cabinet, Mark Telemack, as well as Mr. Tennick, who is an intern in the Cabinet Office, and they're with us today. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Item number 3, messages.
No messages, Madam President.
Thank you, Clark. Item number 4, reports of committees. There are none. Item number 5, announcements. There are none. Item number 6, notices of motion. There are none. Item number 7, petitions. There are none. Item number 8, statements. There are none. Item number 9, introduction of bills. There are none. Item number 10, the first reading of public bills. There are none. Item number 11, first reading of private bills. There are none. Item number 12, questions and question period. I understand there were written questions to the parliamentary for tabling to Senator Campbell. Senator Campbell.
Good morning, Madam President.
Good morning.
You are correct, and written responses have been provided to those questions. Sorry.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Item number 13, the orders of the day. We have one order of the day, and it's the second reading, the Premier and Ministers and Opposition Leader Personal Staffs Act 2019. And also, I understand we're going to go into committee, so that would be Senator Campbell. We will be going into committee on this bill. Yes. No, you would present on the second.
We still go through the normal process, Madam President?
Yes, we follow the normal process. Thank you.
Madam President, I move that the bill entitled the Premier, Ministers, and Opposition Leader Personal Staffs Act 2019 be now read a second time.
Is there an objection to that motion? No objection. Carry on, Senator Campbell.
Madam President, the bill before the Senate is the Premier, Ministers, and Opposition Leader Personal Staffs Act 2019. Madam President, when this bill was tabled, the Premier gave a ministerial statement to the House setting out the rationale for the bill. Madam President, very often there is a need for ministers to have the benefit of political or expert advice. The public service is an impartial entity serving ministers and the government of the day. The ability of premiers and opposition leaders to appoint personal staff has been enshrined in law since 1983, while the advent of the Ministerial Code of Conduct has made provision for ministers to engage advisors and consultant experts. Madam President, this bill here today replaces the 1983 Act and now includes provisions modeled on Section 9.1 of the Ministerial Code of Conduct, advisors, and consultants to permit ministers, subject to the written approval of the Premier, to appoint a personal staff consisting of 1 or 2 persons. Madam President, the bill ensures that those appointments are not part of the public service, but affords them the appropriate scope to properly advise ministers by providing access to confidential information. Madam President, it is important to note that this bill will now require the Premier to make an annual report to the legislature specifying details of all persons appointed to the personal staffs during the previous calendar year. Madam President, I can also advise senators that a code of conduct for special advisors has been prepared and the final draft will be made available to the public. At this time, Madam President, I would like to take a closer look at the bill itself. The purpose of the bill, Madam President, is to repeal and reenact the Premier and Opposition Leader Personal Staffs Act 1983 with amendments to provide, in addition, for personal staffs for ministers. So many of the changes, Madam President, if you look at the citation, you see the insertion of the word minister, and in the interpretation, there's the addition of Section 4 when you compare that with the 1983 Act. So many of the changes relate to the insertion of ministers in the language. Much of the language, Madam President, has not changed. So I will go to one of the new inserts in this that is not contained in either the Ministerial Code of Conduct or the 1983 Act. And that would be Clause 4, personal staffs for ministers. Madam President, with your permission, I'd like to read that.
You certainly may, Senator Campbell.
Clause 4 says, subject to this Act and to the written approval of the Premier, each minister may by instrument in writing appoint a personal staff consisting of 1 or 2 persons to assist him. Persons shall be either experts in their professional field or political advisors. And before appointing a person to his personal staff, the minister shall ensure there will be no conflict of interest between the matters of which the person will be providing advice and assistance and that person's private or professional concerns. Madam President, with your permission, I would now like to read Clause 9.1 of the Ministerial Code of Conduct.
Carry on, Senator Campbell.
9.1 states, on the one hand, the employment of advisors, and this heading is advisors and consultants. So it states, on the one hand, the employment of advisors and consultants adds a political dimension to the advice available to ministers, and, on the other hand, it provides ministers with the direct advice of distinguished experts in their professional field while reinforcing the political impartiality of the civil service by distinguishing the source of political advice and support. Cabinet ministers may, subject to budgetary approval, each appoint up to 2 advisors and or consultants, political or expert. In appointing a paid advisor, the minister must ensure that there is no conflict of interest between the matters of which the advisor will be providing assistance and his private concerns. All such appointments require the prior written approval of the Premier, and no commitments to make such appointments should be entered into in the absence of such approval. So, Madam President, what you see there is a lot of similar language, but at the end of the day, the 2 different documents are stating the same thing. Again, Madam President, if we move down to Clause 6, financial provision, it states the total remuneration of whatever kind payable to the personal staff of the Premier, a minister, or the opposition leader out of public funds shall not exceed the amount provided for that purpose by the legislature. So that language, Madam President, is consistent with the 1983 Act, with the exception, the insertion of a minister. In Clause 7, Madam President, personal staff is not part of public service. Again, we have the scenario with the exception of the insertion of the minister. We have very similar language, updated language, if I might add, because of changes in some of the acts. But it basically states the same as the 1983 Act. If you look at Clause 8, Madam President, personal staffs, personal to appointers. Clauses 8.1 and 8.2 are the same language as contained in the 1983 Act, with the exception for the insertion of minister in both, or the minister in Clause 8.2. So Clause 8.3 is new. It says, for the purposes of this section, a minister shall be deemed to have left office if the governor amends his ministerial portfolio in accordance with Section 61 of the Bermuda Constitution, Order 1968. So again, similar language with an amendment based on the inclusion of personal staff for ministers. Clause 9, Madam President, is new in that it requires the Premier to lay in each house of the legislature an annual report listing the names of all persons appointed to a personal staff during the previous calendar year, indicating their functions, their remuneration, and in the case of personal staff of a minister, whether each person was appointed as an expert in a specified field or as a political advisor. So, Madam President, we see very little that is new in this act. And that which is new is basically language to accommodate the inclusion of ministers, the right of ministers in law, to enshrine that in this law, as opposed to having it contained in the Ministerial Code of Conduct. So, Madam President, with that brief introduction, I would like to commend this bill for the consideration of the Senate, and I would like to conclude with a quote from the Premier's statement last month in relation to this matter. And that is, Bermuda is a complex society with a delicate economy and is facing equally complex issues around economic diversification, social change, and building a fairer society. We must ensure that ministers can call upon the expertise and support required to properly discharge their responsibilities as demanded by the modern era of public service. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Would any senator care to speak on this bill? Senator Kent, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Campbell, for your concise summary of the bill. I certainly agree that this is basically a consolidation of Section 9 of the Code of Conduct and the 1983 Act. There's not a whole lot different here, so I don't see there being a massive amount of debate, quite frankly. But there's a couple comments I have. First of all, the Code of Conduct that relates to the personal staff of ministers that Senator Campbell mentioned in his comments was highlighted in another place, and it was shared that there is a draft copy of this that's going to be ready by the end of June. Well, here we are at the middle of June debating the bill without the accompanying code of conduct. So I don't quite understand the, I guess, rush, for lack of a better word, why these two documents couldn't be considered together in their whole, as their kind of one part complements the other. And it would have made a lot more sense as legislators to contemplate what's going to be in the code of conduct for these personal staff members at the same time as we change their statutory situation from basically consultants to essentially employees. One of the elements that was also highlighted in the House was, I guess for lack of a better word, an inadequacy in the wording of the annual report. It stated, and I won't go into great lengths here, Madam President, because this will be more for the clause-by-clause committee debate that we're going to have today, which says that the report only names those people that were appointed during the previous year. And that manner of wording would fail to publish on the report people that had been appointed, say, 2 years ago, but continued as a personal staff member of a minister or the premier or the opposition leader. The other thing that I guess this bill does not capture, but should possibly be considered in the future, are these remunerated committees that are outside of being personal staff members. And because this is where, when we're talking about transparency and use of the public purse, these are the types of questions that the public are asking us every day. One of the also main discrepancies, and I do not believe Senator Campbell said it in his statement, is relates to some of the employment liabilities for the personal staff of ministers. Presently, they are hired under more of a consultant contract than an employment-style contract, and so healthcare, pension, and I'm uncertain about redundancy obligations are now going to be shouldered by the government when they were not before under the when they were hired under simply the Code of Conduct and not the Premier's Personal Staff Act 1983. So those are all my comments for now. I'll save the beef of my comments for the committee stage when we're debating the clauses. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kemp. Would any other senator care to speak on this bill? Senator Jones, you have the floor.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Madam President.
Good
Good morning, colleagues, and good morning to the wider radio audience. As my colleague has already stated, we on this side of the aisle have no major issues with this particular bill. We recognize that the Premier, in his wisdom, has made the attempt to put what has been in practice in a hard-coded, more up-to-date fashion, which, in my opinion, should lessen the amount of gotcha politics where we ask questions where we want to see the answers. I believe that with this direction, when the Premier gives his statements on the hirings in the past year, like I said, it should reduce a lot of the political back and forth. I do want to raise one or two observations. We're constantly on this side of the aisle looking at the expenditure of the government at a time when our economy is not doing as well as it could be doing. We've witnessed 12 consecutive months of drop in retail sales and the like. Of course, we're looking at the expenditures of the government, and one would think at a time when even the private sector are tightening their belts, we would truly encourage the government to take a page from the private sector and do their best to as opposed to doing less with more, try to do more with what you have, and that's all about strict expenditure practices. We also are concerned that as good as this legislation is, it does cover up a few loopholes. It is still going to continue having questions by the public, Madam President, when we try to match requisite expertise and skills with the job requirements. We understand through this bill that there's two different categories of appointees. One for those that have the professional expertise for that appointment, and for those that are political advisors. Without going into specific appointees that was made, the question still may arise where we're going to want to ask the question, which we're being asked on the street, is how does this person and their requisite skills match the appointment? A clarity of whether that person will fill either one of those roles will be very much encouraged. Also, the question about how to determine the salary range of these appointees. We know that some people may be appointed for their research skills to be able to provide support from that vantage point. And of course, you may have those whose expertise are of a higher level, which we would consider paying them possibly at a higher pay scale. So I think possibly in the future, as we develop this particular legislation, there could be an allowance for a more detailed description of the job requirement and its respective pay scale would be very helpful as well. We definitely do not want to see this particular hiring of appointees as a backdoor into the civil service. We know that that the Public Services Commission, when folks are hired in the civil service, there's the necessary vetting that's done. There's the necessary work that's done to scrutinize anyone that's hired, and so there's a level of comfort that we know that the persons that are hired are going to be properly vetted. We know it's not there yet. We know that this is not a civil service position, but we on this side, we are going to be definitely watching the trends of this government to make sure that as an appointee, that it is a position that's time sensitive. We don't want to see a situation where there's an unlimited stretch of time that this appointee is going to be hired. But all in all, we agree with this bill, and we think it's an added piece to this particular part of the appointee of political advisors and the like. And with that, I conclude my observations, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Jones. Would any other senator care to speak on this bill? No other senator wants to speak on this bill, and therefore entertain them. We will now go into... you have to move.
He can respond if he's got any comments. Yeah.
Senator Campbell, before we move into committee, you have some comments?
Yes, I do have some comments, Madam President, but I'll reserve them for when we're in committee. So at this point in time, Madam President, I'd like to move that the Senate do now resolve itself into Committee of the Whole for further consideration of the bill.
Thank you, Senator Campbell, and I will now ask Senator Jardine if he will take the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, Senators and listening public. The Senate is now in Committee of the Whole for further consideration of the bill entitled Premier Ministers and Opposition Leader Personal Staffs Act 2019. Senators, as you are aware, there is a proposed amendment to Clause 9 of this bill. And so, Senator Campbell, perhaps what you would like to consider is to make a motion to proceed on a clause-by-clause basis, or indeed by grouping clauses together.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I have no objection if the senator wishes to move en bloc everything save Clause 9.
Thank you, Senator Kemp. So if you'd like to make that motion, then obviously I'll put it to the Senate to approve such a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would like to move all clauses except for clause number 9, as indicated by...
Move clauses 1 to 8.
Move
1 to
clauses 1 to 8.
Sorry.
Is there any objection?
So if you just make that motion, I don't want to make it for you.
Okay, well, I thought I just did, but
All right.
I will be more specific.
All right, I'll just say it has been moved that clauses 1 to 8
Yes.
stand part of the bill. Does any senator wish to speak to that?
Do you want to speak to those clauses first?
No, no.
Okay, so just move that they be approved.
Right.
So, Mr. Chair, I move that clauses 1 through 8 of the bill be now approved.
It has been moved that clauses 1 to 8 stand part of the bill. Does any senator wish to speak to that motion? Are there any objections? No objections, so moved. Thank you, Senator Campbell. If you'd like to proceed to Clause 9.
Mr. Chair,
You can
I
just move the Clause 9 stand part of the bill.
I move that clause
And then I
9
would-
stand part of the bill.
Okay,
You-
if you have any comments, you can make it now.
Right.
Okay.
I was going to suggest at the beginning of this, I think Senator Campbell has already made detailed explanation and comments on all of the clauses 1 to 9 during the general debate, and so therefore I would invite you, if you wish to make more, but I think you've made your general comments on clauses 1 to 9, but please feel free to add more if you wish to do so. Senator?
I do. I
Please
have
proceed.
a few. The first thing we must remember that the Ministerial Code of Conduct and the Draft Code of Conduct that we speak about having by the end of June are not statutory instruments and therefore are not subject to the scrutiny of the legislature. But I only say that to kick off the discussion about annual reports. We have many annual reports that are tabled in the legislature, and they go through the process. There is usually no fuss and about the fact that they do come at the end of the year. The process usually includes a budget, which is debated, and then the annual report at the end. So the budget debate is at the beginning, the annual report comes at the end, and independent senators in this chambers and opposition senators have the opportunity to ask questions at that time, and as well as during the budget debate process in the beginning. So that is the case. This bill does not change the opposition's ability to ask questions throughout the year. So they still have that ability to ask parliamentary questions. So it does not change that. And we're trying to keep it focused on things pertinent to the annual report. Those things which are contained in here, we feel are reasonable. What are the functions? What is the remuneration? And in the case of the minister, whether each person was appointed as an expert in a specified field or as a political advisor. in a previous place, the Premier of the country has stated that he intends to include the information based on this Clause 9 for all persons, consultants, advisors, on personal staffs in the annual report.
Senator Kemp,
Point of order, Mr.
what's your point of order?
Chairman. I believe the member may be inadvertently misleading the House. I do not believe there was ever a commitment about consultants. It was simply about personal staff, which relates to this act.
Thank you, Senator Kemp.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Campbell?
can I read from the Hansard?
Yes, please.
Okay. And this is the Hansard for the debate in the other place, which I believe took place on May 31st.
Please proceed.
I'm just finding that location. And this is the Honorable Premier E. David Burt. If we look just below, halfway down the page on the left-hand side, on page 39, the left-hand column. The Premier states, "I thank the member for her question and her point. And the question revolved around a similar reason for, I assume, for the proposed amendment to the language. So I thank the member, this is the Premier, I thank the member for her question and her point. I would see it a completely different way, but I will state the undertaking which I will give, and given that the Hansard is recording this, on each and every time that this report is given, it will show the persons who were hired under this act, under that calendar year, whether or not they were appointed that year or appointed the year before, and all the rest. I am not going to, all of a sudden, not report someone who was being paid out of the public purse."
Thank you, Senator. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, on this side, we see no reason, based on the commitment of the Premier of this country, on record, for making any amendment to this section. And with that, I'll conclude my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Does any other senator wish to speak to this clause? Senator Kemp, you have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move a motion to amend the clause.
Please do.
In Clause 9, which we're debating, I'd like to replace the language with the following.
I believe every senator has a copy of the proposed amendment in front of them.
But for the listening public, Mr.
Please
Chairman, would you like
proceed,
me to read
Senator
it?
Kemp. Yes.
Annual Report 9. On or before 31 May, so I'm looking to replace March with May so that this report aligns with the fiscal year, which is makes it more transparent for the public to follow along with the government's spending year. The Premier shall lay in each house of the legislature report listing the names of all persons removing appointed to a and replacing with who have served or are currently serving on any personal staff during the previous, and again replacing calendar with fiscal year, including A, their functions, B, their inserting gross remuneration, inserting for the entire fiscal year, and in the case of the personal staff of a minister, whether each person was appointed as an expert in a specified field or as a political advisor, which again is as per the original legislation. And just for clarity, I've also provided how the explanatory memorandum, and I know this isn't the binding portion, would be updated to now read, and I'll just read it at this point, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please do, yes.
Clause 9 requires the Premier to make an annual report to the legislature within 2 months of the close of the fiscal year, specifying details of all persons who have served or are currently serving the personal staffs during the previous fiscal year. And may I provide some
Yes, please
commentary
do.
on that?
Senator Kemp, please proceed.
So again, I'm going to quote the same part of the member's proof of the Hansard, and this is not the approved Hansard, but I was also listening to the debate, and I feel it is a accurate recounting of what was said in the House on Friday. I will state the undertaking. This is the Honorable E. David Burt on page 39 of the member's proof.
So this is the member's proof, Senator Kemp, and not the final approved Hansard copy?
Correct. It's about 2:40 in the afternoon on that Friday.
And there's a difference between the proof and the final Hansard copy?
There may be. It comes down to approval in the House,
Well,
or by the members.
There appears to be a difference from... Anyway, please proceed.
I believe that Senator Campbell was quoting from the proof. I don't believe the final Hansard.
Senator Campbell,
That's,
would you
that's
clarify?
correct. That's correct, Mr. Chair.
You were quoting from the
I was
proof as
quoting
well.
from the member's proof.
Thank you. Please proceed, Senator Kemp.
But I will state, and again, this is the Honorable E. David Burt, but I will state the undertaking which I will give. And given that the Hansard is recording this, on each and every time that this report is given, it will show the persons who were hired under this act, under that calendar year, whether or not they were appointed that year or appointed the year before and all the rest. And that basically comes down to the change in the language that we're proposing here by a written motion. One of the reasons why the government seemed to choose not to correct it in another place was because there was not a written motion available. So I've gone through that trouble to provide that to this House. I think seeing as the whole point of this legislation is simply to strengthen the codifying of existing practices, there's really nothing substantially new here that's being changed to laws. One would think that we would want to, seeing as we have this legislation or this bill in front of us, correct it while we can. Having the assurance of a person is a far less important layer of good governance for the public than actually codifying that undertaking in the bill that we're debating today. So I don't believe this bill is anything that the government disagrees to, certainly not given the wording of the Premier in another place. And so I move that the motion that I've presented pass. On a separate note, though, and again, I just want to provide some clarity around personal staffs and consultants. And I noticed that Senator Campbell quoted this same section. This section specifically speaks to people appointed under this Act, and those are not consultants. It was actually a matter of discussion and seemingly some confusion in another place. This refers to political advisors and experts that are personal staff to the Premier, the opposition leader, and the ministers. Consultants are an entirely different animal, and they are not, as termed as such, a part of this Act.
Thank you, Senator Kemp. Before we entertain any debate on the amendment itself, I would like to give senators the opportunity to speak to Clause 8 first. Clause 9 first. And if there are any other amendments that wish to be made from the floor, those have to be considered first before we return to the amendment which is sitting before us at the moment. So would any other senator wish to speak to Clause 9? Senator Kathy Simmons, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just from a procedural point of view, and I welcome clarity on the point, with regard to the debate in another House, was it actually the case that an amendment was proposed, and does the Hansard reflect that? And I will say that I have not looked at the proof or the final. I'm assuming that we're basing our debate today on a document that's not the final.
I'll seek some clarification from Senator Kemp.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and again, I listened to the entirety of the debate on this bill in another place, and there was no formal motion laid in the House. Mm-hmm. There was a highlighting of inadequacies in the wording and an undertaking that the person that presently sits in the role of Premier would effectively mitigate that inadequacy through a personal undertaking, but there was no correcting of the legislation itself. In fact, and again, going back to the member's proof, and this is all in this period for those who want to go back and listen. It's about, this debate goes between about 2:30 and 3 o'clock on the Friday afternoon. And again, I'm going to quote the Honorable E. David Burt. If you have an amendment that you wish to bring during the committee, the standing orders require that said amendment to be typed and done. So this inadequacy was highlighted in the committee debate, but there was not a written motion available at that time. So again, one of the beauties of our system is that we have a second chance to get it right in this chamber, and I have provided that written motion so that we may correct the inadequacy in the wording.
Thank you, Senator Kemp. Would any senator wish to speak to Clause 9? Hearing none, I will then move to the motion which has been put forward by Senator Kemp with respect to an amendment to Clause 9. Does any senator wish me to read that amendment again, or are you satisfied with the written amendment in front of you? Is there no further debate on that? Then I will put the motion. Senator Kemp, if you would like to put the motion.
Yes, I move the motion that's in front of... Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn on my mic so that everyone can hear. I move that the motion tabled pass as presented.
It has been moved that the amendment to Clause 9 as circulated to senators be adopted, be approved. Is there any objection?
Yes.
One objection? I detect more than one objection, so there needs to be a division. There will be a division, senators?
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
If I may, for the sake of clarity, the amendments to the explanatory memorandum don't pertain to any vote on this, as we can't amend those, just so that people understand that. We're just talking about the content
That's right.
of Clause 9.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Okay, so we're voting now on the amendment. So those in favor will say aye, those against will say nay. Okay? Senator Kemp.
Aye.
Senator Kemp, aye. Senator Jones.
Aye.
Senator Jones, aye. Senator Robinson.
Aye.
Senator Robinson, aye. Senator Kathy Simmons.
No.
Senator Kathy Simmons, no. Senator Richardson.
No.
Senator Richardson, no. Senator Haywood.
No.
Senator Haywood, no. Senator Caesar.
No.
Senator Caesar, no. Senator Campbell.
No.
Senator Campbell, no. Senator Michelle Simmons.
Aye.
Senator Michelle Simmons, aye. Senator, Madam President.
Aye.
Madam President says aye. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye. Okay, we have the vote. That is 65, Mr. Chairman. So the motion for the amendment to Clause 9 is affirmed by 65.
Yes, and declare that the motion is successful by a vote of 6-5 and has been affirmed. So we need to...
Now, Clause 9 as amended.
Right.
As amended.
Clause 9 as amended has been approved. Senator,
So I now need to
you need to
move that it.
You need to move the preamble, the title.
You've got
Right.
clauses 10 and 11.
I got the
Yep.
amendment as well.
10 and 11.
Mr. Chair, I move that Clause 9 as amended be approved. Is that the language I would
It has
use?
been moved that Clause 9 as amended be approved. Are there any objections? No objections, so moved.
Mr. Chair, I move that clauses 10 and 11 be approved.
It has been moved that clauses 10 and 11 be approved. Are there any objections? No objections, so moved.
Mr. Chair, I move that the preamble be approved.
It has been moved that the preamble be approved. Are there any objections? No objections, so moved.
Mr. Chair, I move that the title stand as part of the bill.
It has been moved that the title stand part of the bill. Are there any objections? No objections, so moved.
Mr. Chair, I move that, will I say the bill as amended?
As amended.
As amended be adopted.
It has been moved that the bill as amended be adopted. Are there any objections? No objections, so moved.
Come out of committee.
Yes. Senators, that is the conclusion of our debate in committee.
Okay, now, this is for Senator Campbell to move a motion to return the bill to the House.
Yes. Senator Campbell, now that the bill has been amended in committee, you'll make a move to have the bill returned to the House,
To the Senate.
to the House,
Oh,
from
to
here,
the House.
as amended. Thank you.
Madam President, I move that the bill as amended be now returned to the House.
Requesting the House.
You're requesting the House.
House's concurrence.
Concurrence.
with the Senate's amendment.
Requesting the House's concurrence with the
With the amendment that
Senate's
is,
amendments. Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, any objections?
Any objections to the bill being returned to the House as amended? No objection? Agreed to. Thank you, Senators, and thank you, Senator Jardine, for chairing the committee. The bill will be returned to the House as amended with a suitable message. Thank you. We'll move on now to item number 14, the motions. There are none. Item number 15, congratulatory and or obituary speeches. Would any senator care to speak on these? Senator Michelle Simmons, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning to everyone. I would like to spend a moment or two to thank all fathers, all stepfathers, all surrogate fathers, all the fathers around this table this morning, and all those listening to us over the airwaves. In fact, I'm going to put there all men who play any kind of fatherly role to children, or even, may I say, to young adults, and even adults. I'm going to wind the clock back to 1986 when my father died. Unfortunately, it was rather sudden, and I was still quite young, in my opinion, early 30s, and there was a great void in our family as a result. I remember my godfather, and I remember my sister's godfather stepping up to play an important role as surrogates, because they knew we still needed that support of a fatherly figure. And of course we had uncles and cousins who also stepped up. Sometimes men may not always realize how important they are in the lives of children and in the lives of families. But we can take some time this weekend coming, since Father's Day is on Sunday, June 16th, to celebrate the contribution of fathers in our community. So to all stepfathers, I'll say it again, fathers, surrogate fathers, uncles, all men in this community who are nurturing, who are supporting, who are educating, who are mentoring, who are there for our young people, our children. Thank you. And please be encouraged, because you are making a difference. Thanks, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Simmons. Would any other senator care to speak? Senator Kemp, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to extend my congratulations to Mr. Jeremy Cox on the 50th anniversary of the BMA. He was recognized recently at the Bermuda Captive Conference. He's been the CEO now for some 18, 19 years, and we recognize certainly the ever-increasing role the BMA has in safeguarding Bermuda's reputation as a jurisdiction with the ever-moving goalposts that the world keeps putting in place for us. So we'd like to recognize his contributions to Bermuda.
Thank you, Senator Kemp. I'm sure the entire Senate body would agree with your comments. Would any other senator care to speak on the motion? On congratulatory and obituary speeches? Senator Campbell, you have the floor.
Madam President, just some quick words. Following on from Senator Simmons talking about fathers, we have the Bermuda national team who will be playing their first game in the Gold Cup on Sunday, and many of the support staff and players are fathers, and they will be away from their families, some of them, in order to represent Bermuda and also to make a name further Bermuda's name in the sporting field, but definitely put Bermuda further on the map as a very small country that quite often delivers well above its weight. So I would like to commend them for their dedication to the cause, especially on the day when I'm sure they would enjoy being with their families. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Would any other senator care to speak? No, then I would like to just say a few words. First of all, for congratulations to Bermuda's Ombudsman, Victoria Peer, who organized, and she is actually the president of the Regional Ombudsman Association, and there was a regional conference that was held just recently, and it really proved to be a highly successful. There were a number of people who were invited to attend the open sessions, and there were, I think it was 2 mornings in which there were open sessions, and I was able to attend. And so it was really excellent, and I think Bermuda certainly pumps above its weight, and it was really very good. So congratulations to her. I also would like to acknowledge and send congratulations to Merle Brock-Swan. She had her 90th birthday recently, and she decided to, I'm sure she won't mind me saying it, but she has a love for the gumbays, and she decided to dress up as a gumbay, and she was walked into the party gathering. It was held at Osford Park, and it was a wonderful occasion. And I thought, well, she really, at 90, she actually danced in, so that was really wonderful. And I think also I would like to acknowledge or send obituary, not congratulations, but sympathies to Bernice Crockwell. As you know, she worked in the Cabinet Office, and she died just recently, and she will be missed because she really was a person. When you went into the Cabinet Office, she greeted you so warmly with her big smile, and always words of encouragement to everybody who came in, and particularly new ones. And I remember 11 years ago, and she said certain words to me, and each time I went into the Cabinet Office, I'm sure we would all want to send condolences to her family. With that, we'll move on to adjournment. Kathleen Simmons, AG, and Government Leader in the Senate.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the Senate do not adjourn until Wednesday, June 19th, if I'm correct. Until next week. We will. Mm-hmm. All right, so Senate is adjourned until next week, June the 19th. Mm-hmm. Would any senator care to speak on the motion to adjourn? Senator Michelle Simmons, you have the floor.
Madam President, thank you. This is just to encourage all of us and all those who are listening to come and support something which I think this entire community really has benefited from, and that is I'm referring to the commemoration which will take place on Friday of this week at City Hall, starting at 12:30, as we remember what happened 60 years ago, when, under the leadership of the Progressive Group, an end was put to legalize segregation in this country. The men and women in that group really went out on a limb because they felt very strongly about the way in which this country was at that time. We've come a long way in Bermuda. There's more to be done. But I think that this is a community event organized by Glenn Publer, which all of us can support at some point during that period on Friday. So on Friday at 12:30 at City Hall, I hope that the community will come out and support the commemoration for the end of legalized segregation in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Simmons. Would any other senator care to speak? Senator Kemp, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to speak to something that we heard last week in the motion to adjourn, but didn't have a chance to respond to, and has, I guess, rather conveniently also been highlighted in today's Royal Gazette. Madam AG spoke about requesting the newspaper to not ask essentially uncomfortable questions, not do investigative journaling, and I quote, and this is both from the paper and what I remember in person, to try and obtain information that is detrimental to what we are trying to accomplish. That approach to asking questions, whether it be a source of journalism or the opposition, I think is entirely counterproductive to the checks and balances that we've built into our society. Another item that all relates to this DCFS ongoing affair, and this time it's not something I can quote firsthand, but I'm going to quote from today's paper. When asked under a PATI request for the full report into allegations of misconduct, Legal Affairs allegedly refused to disclose whether the record existed because the ministry said to do so would, and I'm highlighting the direct quote by the Royal Gazette, add unnecessary confusion to misinformation which is already present in the media and public domain, end quote. Now, I'm struggling to understand how the release of an investigation would add more confusion. One would think that if there's concerns about rumor and innuendo, that releasing the report would put to bed any confusion and, in the name of transparency, allow the public to understand what it is exactly the government investigation has uncovered or not, and would provide people with some insight into why certain decisions were made or not made. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Kemp. Would any other senator care to speak on the motion to adjourn? Senator Robinson.
Good morning, Madam President.
Good morning to you.
I just have a few further questions here on the infrastructure fund. Graciously, no, just offer these.
No, not at this time.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry, I just realized what you were referring to. Would any other senator care to speak on the motion to adjourn? Senator Kathy Lynn Simmons, AG and government leader in the Senate, you have the floor.
For clarification, no other senator wishes to speak.
Well, no, I did ask, and no one did. So.
Thank you, Madam President.
You're welcome.
I'm listening with great interest to the comments of my fellow senator, and I confess to be listening with great dismay. For the benefit of the listening public and senators, we cannot characterize an investigation as something that is fraught with innuendo or respond to reports that put it in that a category of information that should be dealt with outside of the parameters of the law. The Internal Audit Act 2010 prohibits release of the report pertaining to the investigation into Child and Family Services. From a legal perspective, we are not allowed to disclose the report. In terms of the ministry's position, as Minister of Legal Affairs, my role is to make sure that policies and procedures which underlie the operations of the departments within the ministry are sound, fit for purpose, and reflect international best practice. If the senator does not know that, he knows that now. Members of the public are always invited and are encouraged by law to make petty requests. Petty requests also are made within a legal framework. That's what we see played out with respect to every request. We have no control over reporting in the press, but we often comment, and the comments will always be of a nature to ensure that the integrity of our operations is maintained and to reassure the public that we always act in the best interest of the children. We cannot control adult children, parents, or anyone else who chooses to make reports to the World Gazette about their personal experiences. It would be remiss of the department or myself or any other officer in the Ministry of Legal Affairs to respond in a manner that would actually give clarity to the situation, but which would also involve having to release personal information about the child or family situation. We are not allowed to do that, and we will never do that, because it will undermine the integrity of our operations, which is based on confidentiality. The Ministry and the SFS remain committed to protecting the interests of our children. Unfortunately, I'm unable to speak to historic cases that did not come under my domain or under my purview. Last week, I spoke about reporting that did nothing to advance our interests. And when I say our interests, I mean our collective interests in terms of the efforts that we make to support and protect our children. It serves no useful purpose to speak outside the context of the rules and the parameters that operate to protect the children and also protect the operations. Persons who have questions about investigations, which essentially are civil service matters because they involve personnel, are directed to the head of the public service, who will be able to shed more light on the procedures surrounding those investigations. I highly doubt that the head of the public service will reveal personal information pertaining to those investigations. But I can ensure senators and members of the listening public where any investigation gives rise to facts that show that we need to enhance our processes and procedures, that is what the ministry will undertake. We have made great strides within this subject matter. We will continue to do so undaunted by negative press or comments surrounding this matter, and the government remains committed, as always, as does the Department of Child and Family Services, to advancing the interests of our children and to protecting them. I intended to actually bring our statement, and I referred to it last week, pertaining to my trip overseas to visit the children's facilities. I was a bit daunted, and I had to put the brakes on for a minute, because I was informed last night by one of our partners overseas that once again inquiries had been made with regard to children, or one child in particular who was there some time ago, which breached all protocol, and so we're having to be distracted somewhat in dealing with that and to give them reassurance that Bermuda remains a committed partner. The reality, senators, is that Bermuda unfortunately does not provide the options that are necessary for our children in terms of treatment. We simply don't. And in every case where a child is in fact sent overseas, and I'm digressing somewhat, but it's relevant and pertinent because most of the press that we see or dialogue around that matter pertains to that particular issue. We simply don't provide the program to resource expertise that would be able to address the very intricate dysfunction and problems and psychological issues that arise with respect to some of our children, Madam President. And so we are actually very pleased that we have these relationships. But I can say, hand on heart, I don't know one child who would ever jump with glee and happiness if they were told that they were being sent overseas for assessment, if they were told that they had to leave their family and their friends. And I would like to think that in the event that any one of our children or relatives falls into a category now or in the future where they need that assistance, that that assistance will be available. It is available. And we will always support and protect our community partners here and overseas that provide that assistance. But rest assured, Bermuda is unable to service the demographic that's being serviced overseas. So to Senator Kemp, unfortunately, we can't release the internal audit review. It's prohibited by law. Have a look at the Internal Audit Act 2010. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Kathleen Simmons, AG. With that, the Senate stands adjourned until June the 19th. Thank you, Senators. Enjoy your holiday weekend. Yeah, thank you.